Welcome to the latest addition to the Compliance Podcast Network, the podcast 10 for 10, which brings you the week's top 10 compliance stories curated together in one podcast each week. Tom Fox, the voice of compliance, brings you the compliance professional stories you need to be aware of at the end of your busy week. Sit back and in 10 minutes, hear about the stories every compliance professional should be aware of. Every Saturday, 10 for 10 highlights the most important news, insights, and analysis for the compliance professional, all curated by the voice of compliance, Tom Fox. Get your weekly filling of compliance stories with 10 for 10. Hosted by Tom Fox. 10 for 10 is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network. First, a word from the sponsor of the Compliance Podcast Network for this month, Ethico.
In the intricate world of ethics and compliance, each second is precious, and slow case closures are more than just delays, they're missed opportunities. Enter Ethico. Our solution revolutionizes case management, cutting closure times in half and turning every challenge into a chance for improvement. Imagine a workspace where efficiency and compliance coexist harmoniously. Don't just dream of faster resolutions, make it your reality. Visit ethico.com/CPN today to book a demo and dive into our exclusive white paper by Tom Fox, the ROI of Compliance, and to try our free ROI calculator. Empower your team with the tools they deserve.
10 for 10 for the week ending May 18, 2024. Our first story comes to us from the Financial Times, which reports that LIBOR convictions are being reviewed by the Serious Fraud Office in the wake of disclosure problems, including the conviction of former UBS and Citigroup trader Tom Hayes. The prosecutor is examining convictions from its investigations into rigging of key interest rate benchmark to assess whether any documents were missed in its disclosure exercise. More than a dozen cases will likely be reviewed, and this errors first emerged from the SFO from its legal disclosure tool provider Autonomy Introspect in 2022. Next up, Bloomberg, the trial of Senator Robert Menendez over gold bars and cash has begun with opening statements and the first couple of witnesses. He really has an interesting defense as he is blaming his wife for his predicament and is seeking to call a psychiatrist to defend why he hoarded more than $480,000 in cash and 13 gold bars found in his house. An interesting side note, the judge is taking a very active role in color commentary and cracking jokes throughout this trial. Very unusual for a federal judge, but then again, not much you can do about it. Next up from Reuters, a article about the U.S. Department of Justice has told Boeing that it has breached its obligations under its 2021 deferred prosecution agreement regarding the two fatal 737 MAX crashes in 2018 and 2019. The finding raises the prospect of Boeing being prosecuted where it had previously avoided such result and could result in fresh penalties and deepen an ongoing, already humongous corporate crisis that's resulted in management shakeup and government investigations. Boeing did not respond for comment, but the victims of those two crashes' families said basically, we told you, DOJ, you didn't listen to us, and turns out they were right. Next up, from the Wall Street Journal, CFO Journal, Mark Maurer reporting that the PCAOB has adopted tighter rules on auditors' quality controls. It's requiring audit firms to do more to ensure the quality of their work, a move aimed at improving the effectiveness of audits while updating decades-old rules. Under existing rules, audit firms needed to have policies and procedures to cover such areas such as ethics, personnel management, and audit engagement. Firms will have to assess the risks associated with achieving effective quality controls, such as maintaining accurate calculations of performance metrics and designing procedures intended to address those risks going forward. And our final story, or rather our next story, comes from The Economist. which has a very lengthy article, which is entitled, "Why is Britain Hopeless at Punishing Corruption?" But it's a story of the Serious Fraud Office and how the U.S. Department of Justice took away the Unaoil case from Britain. A very troubling story. I would suggest taking a deep dive into it. It's a lengthy story, but well worth the read if you're interested in anti-corruption enforcement literally across the globe. Next up from the New York Times, a disappointing, if not expected story, as FIFA is set to roll back all of the reforms it put in place after its 2015 scandal. The organization has really limited transparency and has gone back to its obliqueness. And how bad were these changes? Well, the DOJ had promised restitution monies to be paid back to FIFA and has declined to pay that money now that had been previously awarded. Instead, it took the unusual step of requiring the creation of a U.S.-based bank account for special funds that receive the proceeds. Next up, from first of two more articles from the Wall Street Journal in the technology section, Meta faces an EU probe over Facebook, Instagram child protection policies. The EU Commission said that it is opening formal probes into both Facebook and Instagram. Investigators will look at so-called rabbit hole effects, where a user is inundated with similar content, as well as the platform's age verification tools and privacy settings for minors. Meta says it wants young people to have a safe, age-appropriate experience, and obviously this is a challenge. Our final article of the day also comes to us from the Wall Street Journal, this time Risk and Compliance Journal. Dylan Tokar reporting that U.S. regulators took another step this week, bolstering AML safeguards with a proposal to require certain investment advisors to verify the identities of their customers. The proposals, which would extend identification requirements that already exist, was issued by the SEC and FinCEN. The move is a part of a broader brush by the U.S. to patch up regulations designed to counter illicit financing and money laundering. In an article from Reuters, the also in trial currently is Bill Wang, former head of Archegos Capital Management, and prosecutors said he lied to Wall Street banks to secure billions of funding he used to inflate stock prices. The judge has repeatedly asked what was his end game here, as it does not appear that he intended to sell or even made any monies from his outlandish actions. Nevertheless, prosecutors are still have said rather he was a billionaire and he risked nearly everything because he wanted more money, more success, and more power. His attorney said his client staked his own cash on companies he believed in deeply and trading like he was prepared to lose it all, which, of course, is what happened. And our final story comes to us from the New York Times, and it's really a series of stories about the FDIC. A scathing report was issued about the FDIC's toxic culture, both in terms of sexual harassment, verbal abuse, racial discrimination, and racial harassment. And this week, the head of the FDIC, Martin Grunberg, went to Congress to basically sit for 3 days and be absolutely lambasted by congressional representatives over his failures and his actions while head of the FDIC. It's unclear whether or not he will remain as head of the FDIC, but the report made for some really difficult reading. Matt Kelly and I took a look at it on Compliance Into the Weeds if you want to take a deep dive into it. I hope you have a great weekend going forward. As I mentioned at the start of this podcast, this month's sponsor for the entire Compliance Podcast Network is Ethico. Have you ever wondered how to show the ROI of your compliance program? Have you struggled with the budgeting process, getting the funds you want for your compliance program? Well, I've partnered with Ethico to put together a white paper on the ROI of compliance, which shows you not only how to demonstrate ROI, but also how to speak finance when you're sitting across from the CFO with your budget proposals. Check out the website, and get the white paper. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of 10 for 10. I hope you'll check out the newest podcast in the Compliance Podcast Network, the Compliance Tip of the Day. In Compliance Tip of the Day, I give a 5 to 8 minute summary of one tip that you can integrate into your compliance program or put together for greater compliance program efficiency.